The wind howled over the frozen peaks of Lunareth, carrying with it whispers of old curses and forgotten promises. The moon, pale and steady, rose above the jagged mountains like a silent sentinel, casting a silver glow over the forest below. In that cold, lonely night, a small figure struggled along the frozen riverbank. A child, weak and trembling, half buried in snow. Alara had been traveling through the mountains, searching for herbs that grew only in the shadows of the cliffs. Her cloak was tattered and her boots were wet from trudging through snowdrifts taller than her knees. Yet when she saw the boy, something inside her stirred, an instinct older than fear. Without hesitation, she dropped her pack and ran to him. He was pale, his lips blue, and his small chest rose and fell with difficulty. Alara pressed her hands to his skin, whispering words she had learned from her mother, words of healing and hope. Snow melted under her touch, and the warmth of her hands seeped into his cold body. Slowly, painfully, he stirred. The boy's eyes opened wide and terrified, revealing a deep gray that seemed to echo the sky above. "Where?" he stammered. "Shh," Alara murmured, wrapping him in her cloak. "You're safe. I won't let anything happen to you." For a moment, the world held its breath. The forest was silent except for the wind, and the moon's light glinted against the frozen river. Then a shadow moved across the snow, not human, but something tall and fierce. Alara stiffened. The Alpha had arrived. King Kale, the widower of the northern pack, stood at the edge of the clearing. His presence was commanding, his shoulders broad, his eyes a sharp silver that mirrored the moon itself. The tales of his wrath were known far and wide. They said he had once lost everything to grief, and that the gods had cursed his line. Any who drew near him would either fall in love and die, or perish trying to leave his shadow. Yet now he stood quietly, observing Alara and the child. His voice, low and rough like gravel, broke the stillness. "Who are you, woman?" Alara turned to face him, her heart pounding, yet her voice was steady. I saved your son." Kyle's expression hardened. His son, the boy who had survived the night, was his heir, fragile and alone. To hear that someone had touched him, held him, even healed him. It was both a relief and a spark of anger. "You touched him?" Kyle's words were sharp, dangerous. "Do you know what you've done?" Alara shook her head. "I didn't know who he was. I only knew he was dying." The Alpha stepped closer. Every step made the snow crunch beneath his boots. His eyes studied her, and she felt as though he could see into her soul. "Mortals do not meddle in the affairs of my pack," he said quietly, yet the cold beneath his tone cut like ice. "I couldn't let him die," she said, meeting his gaze. There was defiance in her words, though her hands shook slightly. "I won't hide from death when it can be stopped." Kale's lips twitched, almost a smile, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He studied her as though weighing a dangerous secret, one that could either bind them forever or destroy them both. Then, with a motion like the closing of a blade, he gestured toward his fortress in the distance. "You will come with me," he said. "If you truly saved him, you will answer for it at my hall." Alara hesitated. She had heard stories of Kale's fortress, cold stone towers that touched the clouds, halls filled with warriors and whispers of curses that haunted even the bravest of hearts. Yet the boy's life had been saved, and something deep inside told her that leaving him now would be a greater crime than facing the Alpha himself. So she nodded. "I will go." The journey to the fortress was silent. Snow swirled around them like silver dust, and the wind carried the faint cries of distant wolves. Kale rode ahead, silent and imposing, while Alara trudged through the snow, her cloak heavy with frost. The boy was nestled in her arms, warm and sleeping, oblivious to the dangers around him. At the gates of the fortress, Kale's sentries watched them with suspicion. They recognized the woman, though none dared speak. She was a mortal, a healer, yet she carried the child of the Alpha. The gates opened, creaking like the groan of old timber, and the cold stone halls swallowed them. Inside, the warmth of the hearth did little to ease the chill in Alara's bones. The fortress was alive with shadows, each corner hiding eyes that watched her every move. Kale led her to the nursery where the boy's bed was prepared, and he laid him down carefully, checking the blankets and fur linings. Alara stepped back, studying the child. Even in the safety of the fortress, she could feel the weight of fate pressing down on her. Kyle watched her silently, the silver light of the moon streaming through the tall windows, glinting off his sharp features. "Why did you do it?" Kyle asked suddenly, his voice softer now, but no less intense. Why risk yourself for a child who is not your own? Alara swallowed, her fingers brushing the edge of the blanket. Because someone had to, she said. Someone has to care when no one else will. I've seen too much death, too much despair. I couldn't stand by. Cale's gaze softened ever so slightly, though his posture remained rigid. For the first time in many seasons, he felt the pull of something unfamiliar, a stirring in his chest that neither grief nor rage could explain. The pack's curse, the warnings of the elders, all seemed to fade in the presence of this mortal woman who dared to challenge the moon's decree. Night deepened. Alara stayed by the boy's side, tending to him as he slept, whispering lullabies she had learned as a child. Cale lingered by the doorway, silent, watching the gentle rise and fall of the child's chest. It was then that the moon chose to speak. Its light touched Alara's skin, silver and soft, and for a fleeting moment she felt a warmth that was not of fire or sun. Her reflection in the polished floor seemed to shimmer, as though the moon itself had marked her. Kyle noticed it too, his silver eyes narrowing, a mixture of fear and awe crossing his features. The curse had awakened. Kyle's lips parted, but no words came. The mark glowed faintly on her arm, a sigil that had not been seen for a century. The mark of the Luna, a mortal destined to bind herself to the Alpha, whether by choice or by fate. Alara looked down at her arm in alarm. What is happening? Kyle stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate. The moon has chosen you, he said quietly, almost to himself. And with it, the bond that no mortal should survive. Alara's heart pounded. She had saved the boy, yes, but she had never imagined this. The stories of the Alpha and his curse were real, and now she was caught in the current of something far greater than herself. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire in the hearth crackled, shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the whispers of wolves and spirits alike. Finally, Cale spoke, his voice low, measured, and impossibly heavy with centuries of grief. If you wish to live, mortal, you must stay. You are bound to me now, whether you want it or not. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She had only ever wished to save a child, to do what was right. Yet fate had chosen another path for her, one that would bind her to the Alpha of Lunareth, to the curse of the moon, and to a destiny she could neither deny nor fully understand. And as she looked into Cale's eyes, silver and unreadable, she felt the first stirrings of something dangerous and inevitable. Longing. The night held them in its cold embrace, and the moon shone brighter, casting its silver judgment across the walls. Somewhere in the darkness the pack stirred. The curse was waking, and the mortal woman who had saved the Alpha's son was about to discover the true cost of heroism. Cliffhanger. The moonlight lingered on Alara's arm, revealing the faint glow of the Luna's mark, and Cale's voice whispered across the cold air. You have touched my son. Now, mortal, you have touched my fate. The morning came pale and gray, the sunlight slipping weakly through the tall, narrow windows of Cale's fortress. Alara did not sleep. She had not slept since the moon had marked her. The faint glow on her arm pulsed softly as if alive, reminding her that the fate of a child and a kingdom now rested, in part on her presence. Cale moved silently through the hallways, his presence like a shadow stretching across stone and torchlight. His silver eyes had not left her since the night before, watching her as she tended to the boy. The child, now wrapped in soft furs, had woken briefly, blinking sleep from wide gray eyes, and whispered a word that sent warmth through Alara's heart. Mother? She had smiled, a gentle curve of lips, and the boy had nestled into her arms once more. Cale had been there, silent, leaning against the doorway, watching the exchange. His lips were a thin line, betraying neither anger nor admiration, but his eyes flickered with something deeper. Curiosity, awe, perhaps even fear. The fortress stirred with life as the pack began to awaken. Warriors trained in the courtyards, their movements precise, honed by years of discipline. The Alpha's advisors whispered in corners. Speaking of the child, the mortal, and the rising danger from Cale's brother, who coveted the throne and would not hesitate to use the curse as a weapon. Alara moved quietly through the halls, carrying water and herbs for the boy. Every step was cautious. Every shadow seemed alive. Every glance from the sentries heavy with suspicion. She had become a figure of fascination and unease. a mortal who survived the Alpha's wrath, touched his son and bore the mark of the Luna. Cale entered the nursery without warning, his presence as sudden as the moon's shift in the night sky. The boy stirred and reached for him instinctively, and Cale's stern features softened almost imperceptibly. Ilara watched the moment, feeling something stir in her chest that she could not name. "The child is strong," Cale said quietly, as if speaking more to himself than to her. "Stronger than I expected," Ilara nodded. "He will survive," she said. "He wants to. And he needs you. But he needs care too, not just strength." Cale's gaze shifted to her, sharp and assessing. "You speak as if you understand more than you should." "I understand enough," she replied. Her voice held no fear, only certainty. "I saved him, and I will protect him." For a long moment Cale said nothing. Then he turned and left the room, silent as the shadow he cast. Ilara exhaled, a quiet sigh of relief that barely disturbed the heavy air. Outside, the courtyard bustled with life. The sounds of hammers, chants, and the shuffle of boots against stone, but the fortress walls could not keep out what was coming. Cale's brother, Rovan, had long sought to take Lunareth for himself. He had whispered to the neighboring packs, spread tales of the Alpha's weakness, and now knew of the mortal who had dared to touch the child. The story would travel, reaching ears that hungered for power. Ilara sensed the growing danger. While tending to the boy, she felt tremors beneath her hands, whispers in the walls, and shadows that lingered too long. Something ancient stirred in the fortress, a presence older than Cale himself, bound to the curse of the moon. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, turning the sky a bruised purple, Cale called her to the balcony overlooking the valley. The wind tugged at their cloaks, carrying the scent of pine, snow, and distant smoke. "Do you understand what has happened to you?" he asked, his voice low, carrying both curiosity and warning. Ilara turned her gaze to him, her silver-marked arm catching the last rays of sunlight. I think I do," she admitted. "The moon chose me, the mark. It means I am bound to you, but I do not understand why it chose me, why I survived when others could not." Cale's gaze hardened. "You are bound because fate has no mercy. You saved my son, and now the moon claims its due. The Luna is not merely a title. It is a bond of shadow and light, of protection and destiny. If you refuse, the curse will follow, and not only you, but him, and the child, will suffer." Ilara's breath caught. The weight of his words pressed down on her. She had thought only of saving a child, but the threads of fate were more tangled than she could imagine. And Cale, he was no longer simply a distant figure of authority. He was the Alpha, powerful and broken, a man whose grief had shaped the very land they stood upon. "I will stay," she said quietly. "If it means protecting him, I will not run from fate." Cale's jaw tightened. "Good. Then you will need to learn the ways of my pack, the rules of the Alpha, and the strength that comes not from power, but from trust." Ilara nodded. "I will do what I must." The night fell, colder than the day, and Ilara returned to the nursery. The boy stirred once more, blinking at her with sleepy eyes. She held him close, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest, the warmth of his small body against her own. Somewhere in the castle, Cale watched from the shadows, silent, the flicker of the moonlight on his silver eyes betraying the stirrings of his heart. Days passed. Ilara learned the rhythms of the fortress, the quiet discipline of the pack, and the tension that simmered beneath every glance, every whispered word. Cale remained ever near, his presence a constant shadow at the edge of her vision. Yet in moments of danger, a sudden tremor in the halls, a distant howl signaling intruders, and he was there, fierce and protective, his power undeniable. And slowly, they began to see each other differently. It began with small gestures, Cale allowing her to stay by the boy's side during training drills, his silver eyes softening when the child reached for her, a touch on her shoulder that lingered just a moment too long. Ilara began to understand the loneliness that shaped him, the grief that had hardened his heart. She felt a stirring of empathy, of care, and something deeper, a longing she could neither name nor deny. But the danger outside the fortress continued to grow. Rovan's forces were gathering, and rumors spread that he would strike when the moon was full, seeking to use the curse to weaken Cale's line. The elders warned that the mark on Ilara's arm was a sign of imminent trial, that the Luna's bond could either save the Alpha and his child or destroy them entirely. One night, as a blood-red eclipse began to rise, the air trembled with magic. The shadows of the fortress seemed to shift, and a sudden scream echoed through the halls. Ilara ran to the source, the boy clutched tightly to her chest. The doors of the training hall burst open, and figures clad in dark armor poured in. Rovin's soldiers. Kyle was already there, sword drawn, eyes flashing silver in the moonlight. His power surged through the hall, a storm contained within human form. Ilara felt the pulse of the moon through her arm, the glow of the lunamark intensifying, calling her forward. "Stay back," Kale commanded, but Ilara could not. The child's safety was all that mattered. She focused on the moonlight, letting the bond awaken within her. The glow from her mark spread, and for a heartbeat she felt herself shift. Not fully human, not fully moon, but something in between. Her senses sharpened, her strength doubled, and the shadows of the invaders faltered. Kale's eyes widened as he saw her, and for the first time he spoke words that carried awe and disbelief. "The Luna. She is more than I imagined." Ilara did not answer. She moved through the hall like silver flame, protecting the child, driving back the invaders with a power that seemed both human and otherworldly. The soldiers fled, their leader's plan collapsing as quickly as it had begun. When the last of them fell, Ilara sank to her knees, exhausted, the glow of the mark fading. Kyle knelt beside her, placing a strong hand on her shoulder. His eyes held a mixture of relief, admiration, and a vulnerability he rarely showed. "You have seen it now," he said softly, voice trembling almost imperceptibly. "The bond is real. You are my Luna, and together, we can face what is coming." Ilara looked up at him, the moonlight catching her silver-marked arm, her heart racing. She had saved the child, survived the curse, and now stood at the edge of a destiny far greater than she could have imagined. Outside, the wind howled once more, carrying the whispers of the mountains, the forests, and the ancient power that slept in the stones of Lunarith. The Alpha and the Luna stood together in the hall, shadows cast long and silver beneath the blood-red eclipse. Cliffhanger. In the deepest chamber of the fortress, unseen by either, a shadow moved, watching. Kale's brother Rovin had survived, and as he whispered the words of the curse aloud, the walls trembled and the moonlight flickered across Ilara's arm once more. "The Luna has awakened, and the Alpha shall fall if she falters." The blood-red eclipse had passed, leaving the fortress in a heavy, uneasy silence. Moonlight spilled across the stone floors, pale and cold, illuminating every shadow, every whispered fear. Ilara sat beside the child, holding him close as he slept, his chest rising and falling steadily. Yet even in this brief calm, the tension of what was coming pressed on them like a weight. Kale stood near the window, his silver eyes scanning the valley below. The battle with Rovin's soldiers had been only a warning. The Alpha knew that his brother would return, stronger and more cunning, and that the curse of the moon would not rest until it had claimed its due. His gaze flicked to Ilara, marked by the moon and bound to him. She was no longer just a healer or a mortal. She was the Luna, a force intertwined with his fate. "Are you ready?" Kale asked, his voice low, carrying the weight of command, concern, and something unspoken between them. Ilara looked up at him, her silver-marked arm glowing faintly in the moonlight. "I will do what I must," she said quietly. "For him, for you, for the child." Kale nodded, and for the first time she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "Then we face it together," he said. The next hours passed in preparation. Warriors sharpened blades, reinforced gates, and whispered prayers to the old gods. Ilara moved among them, teaching them what little she knew of the lunar magic that now hummed within her, guiding their movements and offering protection. Each touch of her hand left a trace of silver light, a reminder of the bond she shared with Kale and the child. As night fell, the wind howled through the fortress, carrying with it the distant cries of Rovin's approaching forces. The enemy was clever, moving silently under the shadow of the forest, their eyes glinting with malice. But they did not know the full extent of what awaited them. Kale stood in the central hall, the child safe in the inner chamber, and Ilara at his side. The Alpha's presence filled the room, a mixture of strength, sorrow, and the raw pull of destiny. He looked at her, his expression unreadable yet full of an unspoken question. Could she face what was coming and survive? Ilara placed a hand on his arm, feeling the warmth beneath his armor, the steady beat of his heart. "We will survive," she said. Together. The first wave of enemies struck as the moon reached its zenith. Shadows moved like liquid across the courtyard and a battle erupted, fierce and chaotic. Kale's warriors fought with unmatched skill, but Rovin's forces were relentless. Steel clashed with steel. Arrows cut through the night air, and the roar of combat echoed across the frozen mountains. Alara's mark pulsed with light, guiding her steps. She moved through the battlefield with a grace that was both human and otherworldly, protecting the child whenever danger threatened, shielding the alpha when a warrior broke through the lines. Each motion was precise, instinctive, and powered by the lunar bond that now flowed between her and Kale. Kale fought at her side, his strength unmatched, yet he relied on her guidance, the trust between them unspoken but absolute. Together they were more than Alpha and Luna. They were a force that the curse itself seemed to respect. But the true challenge had not yet arrived. From the shadows Rovin emerged, cloaked in darkness, his eyes burning with envy and rage. He held in his hand an ancient relic, a talisman that had once belonged to their father, infused with power meant to exploit the Alpha's curse. "You will not survive this night, brother," Rovin called, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "The Luna cannot save you. Fate has chosen her to fall and you to watch it." Kale's jaw tightened. "Fate is not yours to command," he replied, his voice carrying authority that shook even the approaching enemy. Alara felt a tremor in the air, the relic in Rovin's hand resonating with the curse that had haunted Kale's family for generations. She stepped forward, placing herself between the Alpha and his brother. Silver light spread from her mark, illuminating the courtyard, the warriors, and the approaching shadow. "You will not harm him," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "The child is under my protection." "And so is he." Rovin laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "A mortal dares to defy me?" "Yes," Alara said simply. "I am the Luna, and the Luna does not falter." The relic blazed with power, sending a wave of dark energy toward Kyle. He raised his hand, but the force alone was too great. Alara stepped into the path, her mark flaring with brilliance, absorbing the energy, turning it into silver light that shot into the ground and formed a protective barrier around the fortress. Kyle watched, awe and gratitude mixing with the rush of battle. He had fought countless enemies, yet never had he seen such courage, such power wielded with both restraint and love. For a heartbeat, the battlefield was still, the wind holding its breath as the glow from Alara's mark spread across the walls and towers. Rovin's forces faltered, blinded by the light, their attack wavering. Seizing the moment, Kale charged, moving like a shadow through the enemies. Every strike was precise, every movement lethal yet controlled. The warriors rallied behind him, inspired by the bond they witnessed between Alpha and Luna. Alara followed, her presence both guiding and protecting. She moved with a strength she had never known she possessed, a courage born from love and the bond of fate. Each enemy she faced seemed to hesitate, sensing that they confronted not just a mortal, but the power of the moon itself. Finally, Kale confronted Rovin directly. The two brothers clashed in the center of the courtyard, steel meeting steel, the sound ringing like thunder. Rovin's eyes blazed with fury, yet Kale's movements were precise, controlled, infused with the trust and strength of the bond he shared with Alara. Alara stepped close, her silver light merging with Kale's power. Together they formed an unbroken circle of protection and force. Rovin's strikes faltered, his attacks ineffective against the unity of Alpha and Luna. With one final, powerful motion, Kale disarmed his brother, sending the relic clattering across the stone floor. Rovin fell to his knees, defeated yet alive. Kale's silver eyes bore into his, warning and commanding. "Leave Lunareth," he said. "Do not return, or you will face more than you can imagine." Rovin's rage simmered, but he had no choice. With a last glare, he retreated into the shadows, taking his remaining forces with him. The fortress, though battered, had survived. Kale turned to Alara, his chest heaving, his eyes softening as he saw her standing there, the mark of the Luna still glowing faintly. "You have saved us," he said quietly, voice thick with emotion. "Not just the child, not just me, but the pack. You have saved us all." Ilara's lips curved in a small, tired smile. "I only did what was right," she said. "And you? You were never alone. Not while I could help." The child stirred, waking at last, his eyes wide as he looked at the two of them. He smiled, reaching out for Alara. "Luna," he whispered. Kyle knelt beside them, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. He looked at Alara, a depth of feeling unspoken yet clear in his gaze. "You are more than I could have imagined," he said softly. "More than fate itself." Outside, the moon shone pale and steady, its light no longer a curse but a guide. The fortress walls seemed to glow with a quiet power, the battle behind them leaving only the promise of peace and the knowledge that love and courage had prevailed. Alara stepped closer to Kale, her hand brushing against his. The silver of her mark shimmered faintly, a reminder of the bond that would never be broken. "We are stronger together," she said, her voice steady and calm. Kale nodded, his heart full in a way it had not been since the loss of his wife. "Together," he agreed, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard, mingling with the whispers of the wind and the song of the moon. The child laughed softly, reaching for both of them, and for the first time in many seasons, Kyle allowed himself to feel hope, a hope that was not fragile but unyielding, born of love, courage, and the bond of the Luna. As dawn began to rise, casting gold across the snowy peaks, the fortress stood strong, the pack gathered, and a new chapter began. Kale, the alpha, had found his strength not in solitude or power alone, but in the courage and heart of a mortal woman who had dared to defy fate. And Alara, the Luna, had discovered that destiny was not only to be endured, it was to be claimed, shared and honored. Together, beneath the moonlight that had once threatened them, they would face whatever came next, bound by courage, love, and the unbreakable threads of fate. Final line, cinematic tone. The moon had chosen her once as a mark of fate, but in her hands it became a symbol of hope, a bond that would outlast time itself.